I am Mauro Guillen. I'm a professor at the Wharton School, and today I'm here with Professor Martine Haas, also from the Wharton School, who just delivered a fantastic lecture on remote work and virtual teams as part of our class on the pandemic. So Martine, thank you so much for joining us today.
Happy to be here.
So I guess the first question that I have for you is, what things do you see in the world of remote work, both before and after, the onset of this pandemic?
Well, I think if we look at the data on how common remote work was prior to COVID-19, so only a month or two ago, we see that actually, really wasn't terribly widespread. So if you look at the data for the US, the sort of semi-official best kind of guess numbers seem to be around 7% of civilian workers were able to work remotely, like their businesses or their organizations allowed them to do so. And only 3% or so actually did work remotely a lot, as opposed to just a little bit of their work week. So, that's not as high as you might expect. In terms of, post-COVID-19 or during COVID-19, not post, during, obviously, those numbers have shot up. But I think it's really important to recognize that the people who are able to work remotely are a certain segment of the population. There are many people who are not able to work remotely, right? Even today in the world of COVID-19. So when you look at the data from the people that who was working remotely before, we tend to see they're higher income workers. They tend to be managers. They tend to be professionals. They tend to be doing knowledge work. They tend to work for larger companies. And obviously far more people are working remotely right now. But it's still the case that there are a lot of people who can't, right? So particularly there's essential workers, right? So there are people who have to go into their workplaces, health workers, grocery store workers, and so on. They tend to be lower income, and in the US, they tend to be minorities, often African Americans, Hispanic, disproportionately, more often women than men in the US right now are not able to work remotely because they have to go to their workplace. And then, of course, there's also, and the same groups are being hit the most, there are all those people who can't work remotely right now because their jobs do not exist. They can't be done remotely, or their employers have laid them off. And as we're seeing, of course, unemployment is just rocketing, and so lots of people are not working remotely for those reasons.
You're an expert on remote work. From your point of view, what are the benefits and also the challenges for individuals, for organizations, and for society as a whole?
So, for that set of people who are able to work remotely, right, there are some significant benefits, right? And, we're seeing some of those, and we're also seeing the challenges right now through our own experience for so many of us now, trying this out or really kind of doing it in a big way right now. So, from an individual point of view, there are a lot of benefits of working remotely in the sense of you have a lot more flexibility over where you work, the hours that you work. You have more autonomy, right? You can make decisions. You can decide when and where you work, but you can also make workplace decisions without as much oversight and supervision. You can save time, right? A lot of people in a lot of countries, including the US, spend a lot of time commuting. And so the fact that you don't have to do that can be a big benefit to people. It's a big reason why people want to work remotely. You can also save money. Commuting is costly. If you don't have to go to your workplace, you can live further away, right? You can live outside cities. You can live in cheaper places. You can live across the country. And you can live closer to family and friends, and it has sort of lifestyle benefits from that perspective too. That's for individuals. There are, benefits for, society at a larger level, right? If people are not commuting to work, congestion is down. We see that on our streets right now. There's far fewer cars around, and that actually has a lot of benefits if you think of it from a global warming perspective, right? Carbon emissions are way down. Air pollution is way down. You can calculate cost savings, and people do. There's studies that are done on this that say, that there are some substantial savings, including to harmful impact on the environment from people working remotely from society's point of view. And then there are also a bunch of benefits to companies, right, which is why some companies really like working remotely. Some don't, but some do, and allow remote work, at least for some of their workers. And maybe they're going to see some of those benefits more right now, actually, because of everything that's going on, right? And so they're actually, realizing that there are these benefits. Probably, one of the biggest sets of benefits is cost savings. So a lot of companies, a big item of cost for them is office space, right? And if you've got people working remotely, you don't need the same kind of office space. If you've got workers who are happier because they're in their home environments or have more flexibility, maybe you have a lower turnover. Human capital, right? A big reason why companies, will allow remote work is because they can access people whom they couldn't otherwise access and bring them into their workforce, often in different parts of the country or maybe internationally. Productivity, and there's some studies that suggest, I think there's some counter evidence, but there's quite a lot of evidence that suggests that actually people are pretty productive working from home. They tend to work hard and work long hours and actually be quite focused, although we all know that there are a lot of distractions. There's also big benefits to companies from 24-hour work cycles. So a lot of companies use remote work or virtual teams to enable the work to happen 24 hours as it's happening around the globe in different parts of the team. So companies, also there are some substantial benefits that they, I think will seem even greater in light of the experience that we've now had in working remotely. But we're also we're also experiencing a lot of the costs right now. And as individuals, a lot of us are experiencing those costs or challenges of working remotely. Some of them I think many of us are experiencing right now and we can really relate to. Technology is glitchy and difficult, and that can be really frustrating. It can be really lonely working from home. It's really easy to get distracted. A lot of us are experiencing work-family boundary kind of issues right now, which is probably partly, mostly because COVID-19 was unexpected and we kind of had to, suddenly be at home with our kids and childcare arrangements and everybody in the same house and so on. And that's particularly difficult, but it can be difficult for people working remotely more regularly. And then I think for individuals, it's also the case in a more normal time when you might be working remotely that there's a real risk that you kind of fall off the radar screen of your manager or your team leader or whoever the rest of your team, and you might not get much attention, you might not get recognized, you might not get pay raises, you might not get promoted because you're remote. And I think that's a concern that a lot of people have with good reason. For society, as I mentioned, I think there's some real challenges for society of remote work, certainly in the way that we're currently experiencing it in all sorts of ways, but inequality being the issue that I was pointing to earlier, which is just some people can do it much more easily than others. So it's a very unequal kind of benefit. And then largely for organizations, if you think about the challenges for organizations of remote work, they're pretty substantial. Managing people remotely is not easy, and in particular, leading virtual teams is something that it takes a lot of doing. It takes a lot of care and attention to do it right.
You're an expert on virtual teams. Now, virtual teams have been around for a long time, especially at multinational corporations. So, as an expert in this area, what best practices can you share with us about productivity and about motivation in virtual teams?
Yeah, so virtual teams are really challenging. I mean, leading teams in general is really difficult and challenging. I've studied it for many years. I teach executives as well as MBA students and undergraduates about managing teams. And, before we even get to virtual, managing teams is really difficult, right? Virtual teams just amplify those challenges in some significant ways. There's some things that, I sort of consider to be surface level issues, right? So things that if anybody was watching, my virtual team interact virtually, they could pretty quickly see these are difficulties, these are challenges, right? Some of it, of course, is just technology, getting everybody on the same, talking to each other so we can all hear and understand each other and see each other. Working across time zones is really tricky if you've got a virtual team when people are in different places around the world, and making that fair and how you think about that is really challenging. I think we also see real difficulties, again, we see them in real teams, but in face-to-face teams too, but particularly in virtual teams, problems of hierarchy, right? If somebody is senior on the team and somebody else is really junior, that junior person is not going to talk very much, right? And it happens again in regular teams too, in face-to-face teams too. But virtual teams, it really gets amplified unless you pay really careful attention to it, right? And even more so if this is a global virtual team that we're talking about, language differences can be part of that, right? So if some people are less fluent than others, then their expertise, their opinions will not be brought to the table in the same way. And it's just harder to solicit that over using virtual technology than it is perhaps when face-to-face, although even then it's difficult. So those are the things I think you can easily see that are challenging, right? And there's some, specific things that you might want to do around each of those to try to facilitate your team work and make it easier or make it go more smoothly. But more fundamentally, I think there are two major kinds of deep-level challenges that my colleague Mark Mortensen, who's at INSEAD, and I have done quite a bit of research on, looking at particularly teams that are virtual often lack a shared identity, right? People don't view themselves as part of the same team. They tend to view themselves as part of this part of the team. Often there are a few people in this location, and then there's them over there who are in that other location, right? And that's a very dysfunctional dynamic for teams and can lead to all sorts of, conflict and problems like that. The other issue that comes up is a lack of shared understanding. So not just shared identity, but really we don't understand each other very well. People have different information, have incomplete information. We don't realize that other people don't have the information that we have. And that, again, can cause a lot of problems, can cause misunderstandings, and potential, really impede your ability to work effectively. So, to your question, what can you do about this? I think that, there are a lot of specific managerial, interventions that you can do to try to build your team's shared identity or build its shared understanding. And I think thinking about them that way helps you see why you might do all these things, right? So having regular meetings, having frequent check-ins, seeing each other face-to-face rather than just doing things via email or via, other media where we don't actually see each other visually can be really helpful for building that shared identity. People sometimes do virtual tours of their workspaces, right? It's just a way, again, of just getting to know each other, building shared identity. It can also help with shared understanding, right? If you see that I'm working, next to my, kids' playroom, right? That can help you understand why I might need to get up every 20 minutes and kind of check on the kid or whatever it is, right? So there's a lot of specific things we can do, but I think if we think about building shared identity, building shared understanding, right? Soliciting diverse opinions, making sure everybody is heard, and being really deliberate about that. Those are, specific interventions that I think will help to build both of those conditions that we know are really problematic if you don't have them in the teams that you're working in.
Thank you so much, Martine, for sharing with us your expertise and your insights on these very important topics. This was Martine Haas, Professor of Management at the Wharton School.